A pleasant afternoon to everybody. Since I am only the I am the lone representative from the Philippines. Allow me to say welcome to the Philippines and please enjoy your stay. And tonight you will be enjoying more. So since we are a neophyte to this study, we are just giving you few analysis and the first results that will be in public for this FITS Kids study. At the outset, I'd like to thank NNI for inviting us through Dr. Allison to present our first results of this FITS Kids study. So that's our office. Our office is at the Food and Nutrition Research Institute. We are actually mandated to undertake researches, define the nutritional status of the population, and of course, in this mandate, we actually conduct national nutrition surveys every 5 years. And within the 5 years, we do update our data between 2.5 years thereafter. So that means to say that we regularly have different components of the survey, one of which is actually the dietary component. And we actually develop and recommend policy options, strategies, programs, and projects for the implementation by appropriate implementing agencies of the government and as well as the non-government organizations. After we have developed and we have matured technology or matured models, nutrition intervention models, we actually diffuse the knowledge and technologies in food and nutrition and provide SNT services to our relevant stakeholders. Just like what we are doing with our partners, Nestle, we actually do some sort of PPP just because they are the ones giving us some sort of data that are actually usable by the Filipino population. And one of these research is actually this FITS Kids study trying to look at usual and nutrient intakes and food sources of Filipino children aged to 12 years old from the 2013 National Nutrition Survey. And I'd like to thank our partner, Leah Dini. He's actually our consultant for this research. And of course, Dr. Eldridge Allison for having us giving some technical assistance. Mario Capansana is our director. He's now actually attending an APIC meeting in Bangkok. So diet is actually regarded as one of the largest risk factors for the global burden of disease. It is therefore important to assess the food intake of the population in order to link this with other nutrition-specific interventions to address malnutrition. Children from 6 to 12 years old grow very rapidly and can be very active. They need an adequate intake of energy and a diet that provides all the nutrients needed for growth and cognitive performance. However, among Filipino children aged to 5 to 10 years old in the 2013 National Nutrition Survey, underweight was about 29.1%, stunting about 30%, wasting about 9%, and overweight and obesity 9%. Studies on the prevalence of inadequate intake, why are they important? It is because it is very informative for public health, providing useful data for nutrition diagnosis and for establishment and monitoring of public policies in nutrition, health, agriculture, and social development. Specifically, however, we like to use this data to track changes and trends in dietary patterns in the population and within population subgroups. We also like to assess relationships between food and nutrient intakes and disease. We like also to plan nutrition intervention programs and identify the most appropriate foods suitable for food fortification. Nutrient and food intake data are also used to compare food availability among different communities and geographic areas and socioeconomic groups and develop national food and nutrition policies as well as agricultural policies. Information on the diet in the Philippines is required And we thank actually NRC for actually keeping us in the loop because we like to identify the magnitude and distribution of inadequate intakes in the population and develop strategies to prevent and control the different nutritional deficiencies. Given that, the objective of this study, therefore, is to evaluate usual energy and nutrient intakes and food sources of our school-age children using our data in 2013. So for the methods, I'd like to present to you in detail the methodology that we have employed so as to be able to understand the tedious activities and tedious analysis that we have done in putting up this kind of presentation. A very simple one, but we have undergone a very detailed analysis. So the survey used a stratified three-stage sampling design drawn to represent all the 17 regions in the Philippines and 80 provinces of the country in both urban and rural areas. The respondents, there were about 8,592 Filipino households, and the response rate was about 91%. Data from the 6,565 children aged 6 to 12 years old from the surveyed households were actually used in the current analysis. And therefore, we have family income status was assessed by wet quintiles, meaning to say we have disaggregated by our data from poorest, poor, middle income, rich, and the richest quintile. So wealth status is defined by household possession of vehicles, gadgets, and appliances. In the Philippines, it's very difficult to get amount of income. It's just because there are so many donors like pensions and those coming from from abroad, no? So we just defined wealth status by the presence of appliances or possessions. Now, of course, in every research that we conduct, there is always an ethical approval of our committee, and all households provided informed consent. So a two-day non-consecutive 24-hour food recall was used to estimate the individual food intake. And just to inform you, we also have the household food weighing in all the sampled households, in addition to our two-day 24-hour recall. So for the second-day recall, however, only 50% of the 6,565 children are randomly selected of the randomly selected households with only one-day recall were interviewed to have a two-day non-consecutive day recall for the data. This we did, it's just because we consulted our statistician, Alicia Carrie from Iowa University, that she said that in a very large samples like this, you can actually take 50% for the second-day recall. So quantities were expressed in terms of common household measurements, such as cups and the household measures that we have. A computer software called the Individual Dietary Evaluation System, which was actually developed by our programmer at FNRI. We used that to analyze the nutrient intake. For the evaluation of energy intake, the ratio of daily intake to the estimated energy requirements, thank you, Dr. Bailey, for presenting to us the definition of all of this. So I don't need to define in my presentation already for the interest of time. So for the evaluation of energy intake, the ratio of the daily energy intake to the estimated ER was calculated for each person per day, then transformed to the logarithmic scale to remove outliers below -3 SD and above the +3 SD for each age group. After the data editing and processing, we excluded the 19 participants or 19 children from the analysis, giving a total of only about 6,546 children for the final analysis. So usual intakes and distributions of energy and nutrient intakes were used using our the pesticide. That's actually a very famous software to analyze usual nutrient intake. And we generated and added a small amount of random noise, meaning to say if because the pesticide is used actually to shrink your data into normality, but in some cases, like our vitamin C, it gives us a non-normal distribution still, so we just added a certain very minimal noise. For the prevalence of inadequate intakes of iron, a probability approach was used. So total intakes were compared against our estimated energy requirements. And of course, our EER was calculated using the IOM equation, considering age, sex, body weight, and height, including physical activity. And for this presentation, we actually considered active physical activity for our age group 6 to 12 years old. So adequate intake and recommended nutrient intake were used to evaluate actually sodium, potassium, and vitamin T intakes, since these nutrients have no ARs. So the results of so we are also giving you acceptable macronutrient distribution ranges were used to evaluate carbohydrates, total fat, and protein as percentage of energy, and proportion of energy inadequacy and excessive intakes were classified as less than the AMDR. So for the results of this study, I'd like to just to give you a very simple one, trying to transform our very complicated table into a more, what do you call this, reader-friendly slide. So the mean energy intake, about 1,358 kilocalories of all children, was 24.6% below the EAR, which is actually 1,780 kilocalories. As percentage of total energy, 42% of the children had the fat intakes below the AMDR, and hence, most of the energy was provided actually by carbohydrates. 16% of children had protein intakes below the AR, and the mean intakes for total sugar was 26.8 grams, and the dietary fiber was 6.9 grams per day. Take note that I'm reporting to you the total sugar. It's not an added sugar. So, percent contribution of fat and carbohydrates to total energy intake of children by gender, place, and residence. You can see here that most of the children, for male and female, they almost have similar percent contribution. However, you can see here that the rural population have a very high inadequacy in fat intake as compared with the rural population. Now, if it is more than the AMDR, you can see that the rural population have a greater number or percentage having carbohydrates above the AMDR, while those that are in the urban area only about 4%. And the percent of children, percent contribution of fat and carbohydrates to total energy intake of children, you can see that 80% from the poorest quintile did not meet the AMDR for total fat. And 36% from the poorest quintile exceeded the AMDR for carbohydrates. 14% from the richest quintile exceeded the AMDR for fats. So Filipino children had inadequate intake for many vitamins. This is actually a confirmatory slide to the slide of Professor Jay a while ago, that if you have pure carbohydrate as the highest contributor to your energy, you are actually having micronutrient inadequacies. And you can see here vitamin C is the highest inadequate vitamin in our population. It's giving us 81%. For folate, 70%, riboflavin, 67%, vitamin A, 63%, B6, 30%, niacin, 13%, and B12, 9%. Average intake of vitamin D was about 2.2 microgram, considering that we are living in the tropics. The Philippines is having a very good sunlight, but still you can see that our average intake is actually only 2.2, and these are very low compared with the adequate intake, including actually the lower portion is actually vitamin E. Sorry for that. The average intake for vitamin E was actually 2.6 milligrams. And vitamin D and vitamin E are very low compared to our adequate intake. When it comes to minerals, calcium is actually 93% inadequate among our children. And iron, 87%, phosphorus, 48%, and zinc, 38% inadequate. Usual intakes of sodium, magnesium, and potassium were about 848 milligrams, 130 milligrams, and 853 milligrams per day, respectively. The mean intake of sodium exceeded the requirement, while the intake of potassium and magnesium were below the requirement. And I'd like to show you this. Refined rice as a major source of many of our nutrients. For carbohydrates, rice contributed to about 67% of our carbohydrates. Energy, energy, 53%. For protein, 35%. Calcium, 20%. Iron, 28%. And of course, phosphorus, 48%. Thiamine, 32%. And riboflavin, 17%. Our major source of calcium is actually fish and shellfish. That's actually 21%. For fats, pork, sausages. So these are actually our processed meats and oils. Vitamin C, of course, the fruit-based beverages. And vitamin A, we have the dark green leafy vegetables, about 34%. And our folate comes from bread. Conclusion. So the study used usual intake analysis is to demonstrate that the intake of fat and many micronutrients in Filipino children are markedly inadequate. The shortfalls in nutrient intakes can be largely explained by the fact that refined rice was the major source of many key nutrients, while nutrient-dense foods such as milk, fruits, and vegetables had played a very little role in the diet of our Filipino children. The results of this study are informative to nutrition policy and education, both for parents and healthcare professionals, and could be used for the development of various public health strategies to improve diet quality and address nutrient shortfalls in the diets of this population. With this, I'd like to say thank you with a heart. Maraming salamat po.